June 2021, just a few months after taking office, President Biden directed the Justice Department to adopt a zero-tolerance policy to revoke federal firearms licenses from those who committed, quote, willful violations of the law. That same month, ATF updated its internal best practices guide to state, quote, ATF will, absent extraordinary circumstances, initiate proceedings to revoke the license of any dealer that has committed a willful regulatory violation of the Gun Control Act for specified violations, close quote. These willful violations now include purposefully broad classifications like, quote, falsifying documents and failing to maintain records needed for successful firearms tracing, and would essentially allow the ATF to revoke the licenses of FFLs for simple technical and non-material paperwork violations. And ATF is zealously doing just that. The year after the zero-tolerance policy went into effect, ATF revoked over 90 licenses, more than any year since 2006. Last year, that number jumped to 157 FFL revocations. The year before zero tolerance went into effect, there were just 40 revocations. To be sure, the Gun Control Act authorizes the ATF to inspect FFLs to ensure they are compliant with record-keeping requirements and all other applicable laws and regulations. But that is so the government can ensure that there are no illegal firearms transfers occurring, not for revoking licenses for simple paperwork violations. We've talked to some of the affected FFLs. We've even talked to some who beat the ATF in court and were able to keep their license. They told us it cost over $150,000 in fees to keep their license. There's no way the average small business can afford that much in legal and consulting fees, and ATF knows this. And the data shows this brazen scheme is working. The number of voluntary business closures post-inspection has risen sharply from 24 in 2021 to 69 in 2022 and to 80 last year. This is exactly what the left wants. Democrats and Joe Biden have been trying to take guns away from Americans for years. If they can't take the FFLs away, they are going to limit the number. If they can't take the guns away, they're going to limit the number of places where law-abiding Americans can go purchase their firearms. Today, we will examine the actions by ATF that led to the untimely and unnecessary death of Brian Malinowski. At this time, I want to offer my condolences to the members of Mr. Malinowski's family. Some of them are here with us today. We're also joined by Congressman Hill, who I mentioned earlier, who represents Mr. Malinowski's and his family and has sought justice on their behalf. In the early morning hours of March 19, 2024, armed ATF agents arrived at the Malinowski family home in at least 10 vehicles to execute a search warrant. According to the warrant, the ATF alleged that Mr. Malinowski was selling firearms without a license. Footage from the Malinowski's doorbell camera shows ATF agents approaching the house with riot shields and subsequently disabling the camera to prevent their conduct from being recorded. Upon hearing the commotion and fearful of a home intrusion, Mr. Malinowski awoke and prepared to defend his family. Mr. Malinowski encountered what he and his wife believed to be home intruders. An exchange of gunfire ensued. Mr. Malinowski was shot in the head, and he died from his wounds 2 days later. The circumstances of Mr. Malinowski's death raised questions about whether the ATF followed proper protocol during the execution of this search warrant. DOJ policy and President Biden's executive order 14074 requires ATF agents, including those who conducted the search warrant on the Malinowski family home, to wear active body-worn cameras during the execution of that warrant. The department, however, has since confirmed to the Malinowski family that ATF agents were not wearing body cameras during the raid, a clear violation of the department policy. It is also unclear whether ATF agents complied with Justice Department policy on no-knock entries. In explaining the rationale for this policy, Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco noted that, quote, because of the risk posed to both law enforcement and civilians during the execution of no-knock warrants, it is important that this authority be exercised in only the most compelling circumstances. Furthermore, Ms. Monaco directed the use of no-knock entries should be restricted to instances in which an agent has reasonable grounds to believe that at the time of the warrant, that the warrant is sought, that knocking and announcing the agent's presence would create an imminent threat of physical violence to the agent or to another person. It's not clear if the raid was a no-knock encounter because, in part, the ATF agents disabled the Malinowski's home camera. ATF is yet to explain why it resorted to a risky pre-dawn entry of Mr. Malinowski's home when it could have peacefully executed the warrant while he was away from his residence. I think that's a huge question. But the ATF wanted Mr. Malinowski to be home when they executed the search warrant. We know ATF abandoned a previous attempt to execute the search warrant when they learned Mr. Malinowski wasn't home. They were actually primed and ready to go the week before, but didn't go because he wasn't there. Why did they need him to be in the home, as this was a search warrant and not an arrest warrant? In fact, there were numerous other less dangerous options available to the ATF. The ATF knew his pattern of life. They could have chosen to wait for Mr. Malinowski to leave for work and safely approached him after he had exited his home. The ATF could have conducted the raid after Mr. Malinowski left for work and had other agents meet him at his work where he was not allowed to carry a firearm. The ATF could have waited until he was gone and asked Mrs. Malinowski to call him back after the house was secure. ATF agents could have given Mr. Malinowski more time to answer the door during the knock and announce, so he knew it was the police. Since the ATF chose to ignore their own policy, not wear body cameras, we will never know if they gave him the 10 seconds or 60 seconds or whatever to answer the door. And tomorrow, in front of the full Judiciary Committee, Director Dettelbach will have a chance to explain the actions of the ATF. But today we look forward to hearing from our witnesses. I want to thank them all for being here, and I now yield back and now recognize the ranking member.